And today I have the immense pleasure to have as a guest Patriot nurse. Hello.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much for people who have read my, is it my second book out in the US? It's certainly my third book that I wrote, Woman on the Verge of Societal Breakdown. You're part of it. You made me the pleasure to write a little text. And for those who don't know you, maybe you'd like to introduce a little bit what you do, who you are, where you are, roughly.
Hello, friends, and thank you so much, Piero, for having me. So my background is obviously as a nurse, and I'm also a Southerner in the United States. So we have our own unique flair and culture and accent, as your listeners and viewers will probably notice. But I've been a nurse since, oh my goodness, over a decade now. Yeah, sometimes I have to think, it goes past me. But I have worked in various different practice areas. I've worked in inpatient psych, I've worked in pediatric psych, alcohol drug detox, med surg, like total hip, total knee replacement, labor and delivery, and also had a stint in emergency and trauma as well as in education. So I have a fairly diverse background in nursing, but what really catapulted me into the preparedness mindset was my initial experiences doing short-term international medical missions. And in a way, we as healthcare providers are quite spoiled in a positive sense in the United States, because up until recently, we have had essentially everything that we needed, all supplies available at our disposal. And so when I was doing the short-term medical missions, specifically in the Indo-Chinese Peninsula in Southeast Asia, with a small group there, actually it was a German Christian NGO, and the experience that I had working there really taught me that we had to embrace flexibility of mindset and adaptability. In the United States and in much of the Western world, because our medical care is so liability driven, a lot of times we don't develop this adaptive thinking in our healthcare providers because we're trying to corral people into protocol. And so as I gained experience essentially having to improvise and make do and adapt with what I had, I realized when I came back after that experience that there wasn't really that much separating our experiences here in the United States versus someone else's experience in maybe another part of the world, other than we have a constitution and have been historically blessed with decent people, friends, neighbors, and good and prosperous times. But for any student of history, you know that these things are cyclical. And so in my mind, I thought, what I experienced, what I saw could very easily happen here. And so from that point, I essentially started answering questions and making YouTube videos because I saw that in that preparedness mindset at the time, there weren't a whole lot of YouTube videos addressing specifically the medical aspect of preparedness and self-sufficiency and dependence mindset. And so that's what I've sought to do. And thank God I've been very, very blessed with it. I have amazing followers and amazing supporters and subscribers, including you, obviously. So I want to thank you for that. But it's been a wonderful experience being able to help people.
So you do training courses across the country as well?
Yes, I do. The whole COVID thing has thrown a wrench into the gears, so to speak. But for the past few years, I've really tried to reach out to people, and I'm actually in the midst of creating an online course which will allow people who can't get out and who can't travel to have access to some of my learning opportunities and course curriculum.
Excellent. We will definitely put the link below the video for people to get to know what you're doing. Of course, you're right. A lot of people who prep or survivalist, whatever you call it, they seem to always go for the canned food. Obviously, the toilet paper these days, it seems. But obviously also the guns, the bullets, and all this is fine. But you're right. Often the medical preparation, the nursing, okay, no one is asking anyone to train as a heart surgeon, but certainly the little things which are important, if not cured, dental, all the little things are very important, and this is very interesting. So I encourage people who watch this to check out your videos and your courses. Now, a lot of things have changed. You may know or not, but I've been with my family and also myself traveling and working in the U.S. extensively since the late 70s. And it seems to me, and perhaps you can tell us more, America is a bit changing right now.
Oh, most definitely. Most definitely. There are many reasons for this, but the influence of Marxism, and especially cultural Marxism via the education route, that really cannot be underestimated as a very true, legitimate, and prescient threat for our way of life, for our freedoms, and for our liberties. And this has essentially been going on since the turn of the century, but really over the past few decades, there has been almost like this J curve upswing in momentum of destroying our history as free people, demolishing our statues, attacking the great men and women in some cases who made this country what it was, a city on a hill and a place where a free individual could prosper and grow in their own particular soil. And now it seems really over the past, I would say since the turn of the millennium, I would submit, we have seen this focus on political correctness and not offending people. And the casualty of this has been our freedom of speech and our liberties on the whole.
Yeah, it's, for people of my generation, I'm much older than you, America was the city on the hill. America was something that we were amazed by how efficient, how great quality it was, and for people like me who worked and lived there, how kind-hearted the people were. And yes, sure, there was a bit more violence than, but then it was due of some roughness that was part of the conquering of the land that happened over centuries. And now, even working in American companies, if only a decade ago, I could see some incredible softness in the very wrong way. And as you said, all these Marxism, this cultural Marxism has permeated even businesses. Now, you mentioned you're a Southerner. Long time ago, it used to be a difference between Southerners and other parts of the country. Is it still so in that? Are you preserved from this influence, or are you also touched by it?
Well, that's actually a great point. And traditionally, Southerners had been more traditionally minded. And because of the way that our country was founded, you will find that there was a heavy anti-federalist sentiment in the South. A bastion, essentially, of anti-federalist sentiment was in the colony, later the state of Virginia. And so much of our early history was informed with a leave me alone. I want to be free. I don't want anybody telling me what to do. We have a very independent mindset, all the more so in the mountainous regions, which you tend to see everywhere, really around the world, that mountain dwelling people tend to be more, leave me alone, I'm independent. Now, what we've seen actually over the past 30 years, Florida is really the #1 recipient of this. Because southern states traditionally have been more independent and freedom mindset, they've also been much more hesitant to have statewide implementation of things like income tax, for instance. So we've been seeing that as many of the baby boomers up north in places like New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, these places that have such oppressive taxation and really crippling regulations systemically for the businesses, people are leaving those areas and fleeing south to a place where they can essentially keep more of their money. The problem is that not everybody has realized that the way they voted when they were in different parts of the country had a direct impact on their quality of life. So we're seeing that people are coming to the South and in other places, for instance, in the West, like Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, people are coming to these areas for freedom, but they're not checking their pathological ideology at the door. And so essentially, they're spreading this over a more diffuse area. So it has been a challenge for us.
Now, when I was a kid, first time in the US, the population was around 200 and something million. and now it's almost 300 and I mean, probably no one really knows, but it's at least 330, perhaps 340 millions. Now that's a huge increase, and immigration tends to vote on the liberal side. That is a statistical fact, and they're great people among every community, of course, but there's a lot of this trend of, because Democrat of 1980 is an ultra extreme far right today compared to what Democrats are today. And so when I hear some of your younger politicians having extremely far left fascist, in fact, because for people who don't know, fascism and Nazism are socialist ideologies. Let's remind that. It's not the right, it's not conservative, it's socialist. Like communism, which is a different brand of socialism, but still is the same family. Well, what made America rich was this immense innovation and the spirit of hardworking people who could invent new stuff, and everything we have, the computers we use, the internet, a lot of this stuff comes from America. And I fear, now I'd like to have your opinion on that as socialism grows, the debt, the weight of the debt, the weight of people who are not working, who are on food stamps, basically on the plantation for the socialists, it makes it so heavy that the country cannot be prosperous anymore. It cannot innovate, and the smart people will eventually leave, and therefore we will not benefit from America anymore across the world, including the defense, including a lot of those elements that we take for granted across the whole world, really, because all of Asia is protected by America, and all of Europe is protected by America, all of Africa is protected by America, and so and I'm a guy who's against war. I was against the wars in the Middle East and all that for reasons we won't go today, but still I recognize the importance of America even in that field. Do you think that's gonna end up well or not? And what is the impact on people's preparation, especially in America, but also across the world? What would you advise to people as preparation, and what should they do, in your opinion?
That is a fantastic question. And to your point, yes, there is a very real and pressing issue with business owners, with innovators, and with entrepreneurs. Because and I've experienced this in my own life, when I looked at the years that I have paid so much in federal income tax, I looked at it, and in many cases over the years, I looked and I thought, I could have hired somebody to help me with my business, and I could have scaled my business with the amount of money that I am paying for a government that is essentially offering me very little and is curtailing my rights and is stealing my liberty from me. And specifically in the case of what we've seen with rioting and with breakdown of rule of law here domestically, there are two issues coming up where it seems like the socialist bent and the welfare state is actually speeding up the decay of the United States and is indeed causing an avalanche effect. The first is that when you look at people like me and people like you, people who work, people who get up every morning and have jobs to do and are productive, our tax dollars are essentially being weaponized against us right now. Because if, for instance, these same people who are burning down neighborhoods and who are rioting and who are destroying property and committing acts of violence, if these people didn't have a check showing up or some way to feed themselves at the hands of the taxpayers, they would be under pressure not to starve and would be forced to go get a job in many cases like everybody else. There are clearly some exceptions, but for the most part, we are seeing this as the case. So our tax dollars that are being extracted from us under the force of incarceration threat, they are being weaponized against us. Furthermore, in the case of small business owners, this is a secondary facet of an answer to your question. business owners are forced to pay in the United States the unemployment tax for their employees. So essentially what's happening is that if I employ somebody, I am responsible for paying tax to cover unemployment benefits for that individual. Because of what we've seen with the expansion of welfare programs and handouts subsidized by the taxpayer in the recent months for this whole COVID scenario, there are many instances where business owners are not able to essentially lure their employees back to work because their employees are getting paid more to sit at home and collect unemployment benefits than to come back to work. So you as a business owner are fighting in the labor market against the taxes that you are forced to pay out. So I see that the very real consequence of this in the future is that there is not only going to be an intellectual capital flight from the United States, but there will be a material capital flight to other places, because as we have shifted away from brick and mortar stores and from concrete world to internet-based businesses and service-based industry, people are going to say, I can work from anywhere. Why am I paying these taxes? Why am I fighting this battle each day? So I foresee that unless there is something drastic change in our taxation and in our economic policy, we are probably going to see a major decline in not only our productivity, but our freedoms in the United States as well.
And of course, the impact is that this brings turmoil, social unrest, yes, potential increase of violence. What should people? How can people prepare for that? What as a prepper, what's your philosophy on this? And has it changed over the last 6 months?
There are three things that are universally present throughout the historical human experience: war, famine, and disease. It's always been that way. As long as human beings exist on this planet, they will probably be encountering one of those three things. So for the longest time, we've heard the maxim, beans, bullets, and Band-Aids. I would add Bible in there too, because you got to have a reason for living in the midst of everything else. But the beans, the bullets, and the Band-Aids, they are important as not only things to store, but also areas of focus for developing our skill sets. And so for me, for the longest time, I've really been focusing on not only self-defense, but also being able to develop my skills, my essentially improvisational and adaptive skills with medicine. Because specifically when it comes to medicine, we spoke about this earlier, in the Western world, and particularly in the United States, we have become so used to having protocols for everything and supplies that never run out and a constant stream of inventory, which allows us to essentially operate relatively stress-free when it comes to being innovative with problem solving. However, we have seen in recent months that when you have supply line and pharmaceutical disruption, in many cases, people are having to be creative. Healthcare providers are having to be creative. So for my own part, I took upon myself herbalist education specifically, so that way not only would I have the classical medical background, but also I would have an alternative, or I would submit, historically literate background in order to complement what I offer to my students and my own perspective as well.
Now, is that something that is commonly recognized in the US, or let's say normal doctors don't frown upon this kind of approach?
I would say that it is changing, but in my experience working with European doctors, I found that the European doctors tend to be much more open towards the herbal usage as perhaps maybe not like better than pharmaceuticals, but definitely having an appropriate pairing with pharmaceuticals. I would submit there's a lot of balance that we don't tend to see as much in the United States. It's changing, but that's what I've seen.
Now, during this recent COVID crisis, we've figured out that most of our supplies and medication, in this case, was produced in the region of China that got locked down first. But also, generally speaking, that we are incredibly dependent. We rely upon supply chains that should work perfectly so that pharmacies, drugstores, and hospitals get supplied. Now, was the experience of the last few months something that changed the way people look at how much they should have supplies in their own house, or even the hospitals and the general health system? Are they reconsidering this dependency on foreign import and also on supply chains? Are they changing their view on that, or is it still the same?
Well, I would submit that it's definitely a talking point, because all of the ads that I see for the upcoming election, for the doctors who are running, we have several in my area, doctors who are running for Senate and Congress, and this is a major point that they're all seeking to address, is our dependency upon foreign supply chain, which from any responsible analysis, if we're going to be free and independent and prosperous nation, any nation has to be able to create and at least provide much of its own supplies and needs internally, right? So I do see that this trend towards globalism was on the expanse really from, the post-Ross Perot era in the United States, from really Clinton onwards up until about George W. Bush's presidency. And over the past decade, we have seen a retraction from this, a fleeing from globalism. And we see this as evidence with Brexit, for instance, that all around the world, people are seeing, wait a minute, there are benefits afforded to us by this, but there's also a lot of sacrifice that's being borne disproportionately by the lower and middle classes in our own countries.
Sure. Now, when people come to your courses and to your training, what do you advise them to do on their house in terms of medicine and in terms of medication? What do you advise them to do, to buy, to store? What's your advice to most people?
It's a great question. And I've made several extensive videos on how to create a really good medical kit, probably half an hour worth. They're older videos, actually. But one of the first things that I try and communicate to people is that if they have pre-existing medical conditions such as diabetes or heart arrhythmias, anything that requires that they have a pharmaceutical or they're dependent upon a drug in order to live, essentially, that they have a conversation with their healthcare provider about creating at least a 30-day supply of that, or if possible, even longer, because of potential supply line disruption issues and because of essentially not being able to go out, leave their house, or there being a shortage in supplies, or as we've seen recently in the United States, a redirection of our local domestic manufacturing capability for certain drugs at the cost of others, right?
Okay. So the do you see that more people have started preparation now that we're in the lull between first phase of COVID and whatever they say, second phase, maybe, who knows? I have my for maybe you don't know, but my latest book was on chemical, bacteriological, and nuclear preparation, nuclear warfare and nuclear accident preparation. And on the biological part, I did talk 4 years ago about coronavirus type pandemics. So I know a little bit about these things. And while in January and March, I know that all of you and all the people we're in touch on the internet we were really wondering about this thing. Now my opinion has changed a bit, but I'm not going to say more, otherwise they strike my channel. So anyway, we can talk offline. But certainly, what you see in terms of this particular virus and preparation, do you think people are now more aware, or are they going back to normal life? And
I think people are more aware, and the primary evidence for this, aside from the bare shelves in grocery stores, it was a recent report that I saw that families are holding on to cash right now in the United States more than they have. I think their average savings rate is up 20% from a particular article I saw. That in a country whose mindset has been spend and charge it and put it on the credit card, that's very telling, because whenever you see cash assets expand, especially on an individual's portfolio, I'm not a financial advisor. But whenever you see cash expand, that's reflective genuinely of a feeling or of an appreciation of uncertainty and of a lack of clarity for future movement and future decision making. So I do see that people are moving towards preparedness, even if they don't even call themselves preppers. The very fact alone that they're holding on to more cash due to uncertainty tells me that that mindset is shifting, at least right now it is.
Of course, all our forefathers had stores of food, of medication, of alcohol to help through difficult times. And of course, they weren't called neither preppers nor survivalists, obviously. Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned the Bible as an element that is important. And I wholeheartedly agree that spirituality is a fundamental asset to have. Now, I'm born a Catholic, and I live in a world where it's very hard to believe into anything. It's very, very hard. And this is probably, in Europe, it's probably even harder, that where, unless you're a Muslim, our religious traditions have vanished. Now, why do you think, it's more a rhetorical question, but why do you think spirituality and religion is so important, and how can it be helpful in those times?
I think one of the reasons why it's so important is that it's a very fundamentally human trait to ask why. And science can tell us many things. The observed reality can tell us cause and effect, and it can tell us the what and the consequence of things, but not necessarily the why. I mean, we know that certain laws of nature exist, but why does nature even have laws? Why are laws a prerequisite for nature? Why does it have to be this way? Why am I here? Why do we suffer? Why is there good and evil? Why does evil seem to triumph at times versus good? And I, over the past few years of my life, as I've been growing, I think we all are in this path, where we are constantly challenging our experience versus what we know and what we've internalized as truth. For me, drawing from Scripture and drawing from the Bible, I see within the totality of Scripture encapsulated human experience from eternity past into eternity future. And there's a particular verse that Solomon wrote, King Solomon, way back when, said, "There is nothing new under the sun." Sure. And that is so true. And when we recognize as humans that everything that we have felt and experienced, whether good or bad or heartbreaking or anguish, all of this has been experienced by people before. And I gather great strength from recognizing that I am not alone in this world. And from my own belief, I believe that the Lord God Almighty, who created heaven and earth and the entire universe, put me in this place and time to make a difference in people's lives. And so it answers the why for me, and it gives me hope in harsh times. And I'm not perfect. That doesn't mean like, okay, I have belief, therefore I live perfectly by any means. But what it does do is give me clarity and a point of focus and a calm in the midst of the storm.
I think it's often an element that is overlooked by many. And even if you're not a believer in God, certainly you need to find the structures. That's certainly something that is very important. And of course, many religions provide those structures. So, it's a quick path for sure. Now, the cultural Marxism, as we've seen, of course, before in the economical point of view, has failed everywhere in the world, with all races, all geographies, all kind of wealth of countries. It failed in rich countries, it failed in poor countries, it failed in Africa, it failed in Asia, it failed in Europe, it failed in Latin America. Why do you think, and what I wanted to mean is it also comes with the eradication of faith, or at least the replacement of faith to some different faith. Instead of Jesus as the Messiah, you have the proletarian people or whatever. Instead of the apostles, you have Marx, Lenin, and these guys. So the mental structure remains the same, but the beliefs are extremely different. And as if you can judge a tree by its fruits, it has failed every single time. Now, the question, in your opinion, why is it so attractive to so many people, despite the evidence?
I will answer that with a quote from the great Thomas Sowell. And Thomas Sowell said that, to paraphrase, he said that the track record of Marxism was so abysmal that only an intellectual could believe it could work. So I think, to reflect back on one of our earlier points, because we have seen the invasion of Marxist thought, specifically in the educational systems of various Western countries, it seems that it's repackaged and rebranded in each new generation as something revolutionary, that it just hasn't been given a fair shot, that it just hasn't been done the right way with this particular flavor. But we know, as you said, the tree is known by its fruit. Everywhere in the world where we look at the fully implemented vision of the Marxist founders, the Marxist apostles, we see unparalleled suffering of humanity. And we see the degradation of the value of mankind, of the dignity of a human being, a person, for his true worth in the span of the universe. You know, individuals, I submit, were created by God to thrive individually and to use this time on earth to meet their full potential, where Marxism and communism seek to obliterate the individual and to create a world where there are no distinctions, where there is no individuality. It's interesting. I was reading a book recently called I think it's The Lost Art of Dress. And in this book, it was fascinating because it was primarily coming from a seamstress mindset, which may be a little bit different than perhaps you thought we were going here. But the lady made a very good point about how, especially in the United States, women's clothes were tailored, women were regal looking, they had elegance about them and poise and grace, into essentially from the 1880s for sure up until the 1950s.
So
with
did
the
men. And so did
with
men.
the advent of the feminist revolution and of the beatniks and the cultural Marxism, we saw that finishing school in elegant dress was now degrading for women, essentially because the author made this point that beauty and art prior to the advent of this upswing in Marxism were viewed as a reflection of God's creation, that because God was a God of order and that creation was inherently predictable and beautiful and geometric in design, that such beauty would be reflected. Whereas we see in Marxism, when you look at these places that have fully implemented this ideology, it's uniforms and a very androgynous take on things, and obliterating distinctions between men and women is somehow oppressive. So I see overwhelmingly that in each generation, no matter how it's branded, it's about destroying individuality and celebrating conformity and essentially creating a world of cookie cutter people.
Interesting. Well, German philosopher Nietzsche, 120 years ago, a bit more, basically said that when he said God is dead, he said it as a warning. He didn't say as a triumphant, by the way, as a triumphant claim. He said, God is dead, and now watch what's going to happen. And what he forecasted 120 and something years ago was that people who, as you said, people are different. Some people have skills, some less. Some are beautiful, some are ugly, some are smart. But then there is a place for everyone. And I'm sure you read Ecclesiastes. And just as there is a time for everything, there is a place for everyone. And you have to do the best you can with what you have, and so on. However, without that structure, Nietzsche was saying, I warn humanity that without that structure, which is God, then people will start to resent the differences, because there's no equality of results. It doesn't exist. It can never exist. Therefore, in fact, in the socialist system, the rulers are extremely wealthy compared to the masses, yes, because they take everything, and the masses are not prosperous because you don't want to prosperity makes them not needing socialism. So there is an incentive to keep everyone poor and failing. And that is where it ends, is that if you can't make everyone beautiful, because you can't. Instead of aiming for to be as best as you can, you are going to aim for the lowest denominator, which is always zero, which is the most ugly, the most stupid, the most ineffective, and the least prosperous. And it always goes down into something that ends up with concentration camps for whoever is pointing out the problems. Whoever thinks freely ends up in the gulag, or gets shot with a bullet in the head in the middle of the forest in the night. And this has happened in Russia. It has happened in many countries. I wouldn't want to see it happening again in my part of the world, and I sure don't wish it in your part of the world either, and because that would be a disaster. So because we cannot say everything that we probably think, because we are on a platform that can be censored at any time, on the things we can say, what would you advise, and perhaps to finish today, people to at least, since we can still say some of the things, how would you advise people? Should people hide? Should people voice out? What's your take?
I think we're at the point right now where if we do not step forward in boldness and make ourselves known, that we stand a very good chance of being drowned out. I can't remember where I heard this saying, but the saying is very true in my observation, that the problem in the world is not the strength of evil, it is the weakness of good. And we, as especially Bible-believing people, have been unfortunately taught in many cases to be mild-mannered, to sit back, to turn the other cheek in an improper application, I would submit to you, and essentially become pacifists. But that is not what I submit our biblical mandate is. It is certainly not the mandate that our founders gave to us at the price of their blood, their lives, their fortune, and their sacred honor. They expected us to keep this fire going, so to speak. And with passing a torch, I like that picture of passing a torch of freedom to the next generation. Fire requires fuel in order for it to light up the darkness. If we are going to light up the darkness and take a stand against these vile and vitriolic ideologies, then we have to strengthen the good in us and come from a place of groundedness and of spiritual faith. Similar to the Tytler cycle, for those of you who are familiar with the Tytler cycle of history, spiritual faith always forms a foundation for deliverance from bondage into freedom. And I think we have to embrace that and rekindle that in ourselves.
Well, amen to that. So please stay online after we finish. But first of all, there might have been some noises because I'm recording outside. So apologies for the viewers if there was some noises. We have farm machinery going on around my farm right now. It's the time of the day where the hay is getting harvested for the winter. We start already, of course, and so I hope the noise wasn't too bad for all of you. Patriot Nurse, I thank you very much for your time. We should do this again sometime.
Yes.
And if we don't get censored by then, and otherwise we'll be on other channels, of course. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll speak again. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So, stop recording.